Good morning. Welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Ferris, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll proceed immediately with the reading and discussion of the book Rome and Civil Liberty by James A. Wiley. We concluded yesterday on page 122 of the book. If you're following along in Google Books, Rome and Civil Liberty by James A. Wiley will begin in the first full paragraph on that page, retreating just a paragraph from where we ended yesterday. Remember, the seating of this Catholic League in Ireland, which was organized to help bring about papal control of the British islands and to overthrow the Protestant government. And the first area of business for this council, for this assemblage, this Roman Catholic Defense Association, was to tear down the Ecclesiastical Titles Bill. And then the next order of business was to overthrow the established church in Ireland, that is, the government-sponsored church, the Protestant church, to overthrow the Protestant establishment in Ireland. He says in the first full paragraph, he says the next object was aimed at was the overthrow of the Irish establishment. Okay, we're to see that as the British influence in Ireland. He said, with an excess of moderation, that establishment was to be suffered to exist in its religious capacity, but it was to be unsparingly extirpated in its character as a favored corporation. In other words, they were going to overthrow British rule in Ireland. And that is the Protestant rule of Ireland. Okay? Britain being Protestant by law and having control over Ireland, it was the Roman Catholics of Ireland that were going to overthrow British rule, Protestant rule. And he said the meeting did not issue an order yet to Romanists to pull down Protestant chapels or disperse congregations by force or imprison or maltreat in yet worse fashion men for reading the Bible. Okay, that was the norm in the old world order when the Pope ruled supreme. That was to pull down heretical chapels and churches and to dissolve Protestant heretic congregations by force and to imprison and abuse and torture men for reading the Bible. Okay? This Roman Catholic Defense League did not so order Catholics to do the same thing, but they made the imperative obvious that the established church in Ireland, the Protestant Church of Ireland, and Protestant control in Ireland had to be overthrown. He says, but it proclaimed exterminating warfare against the Irish church in its, quote, unjust possession of titles and glebes acquired by robbery and retained by fraud and bloodshed, the legislative and political authority conferred on its so-called bishops and whatever else belonged to its temporal character as an establishment. So the Protestant church had no right to exist, and its prelates had no authority at all. Because as it is believed in the Roman Catholic world, those ecclesiastical titles can only be given by the Pope. And so they are usurpers of the Pope's authority. Now he says, another piece of work chalked out by the Catholic Defense Society was the abolition of all penal laws affecting Jesuits and other religious orders. Now, if you're unfamiliar with British history, and I'll be brief with this, I've mentioned it many times, the Jesuits were constantly plotting the overthrow of the Protestant crown. Okay, and it came to the point where after the gunpowder plot of 1605, England had to kick the Jesuits out of the country, just as did every popish country throughout the world. The Jesuits were just bull mooses in a china shop, and they outraged the entire European continent, not just Great Britain. And the Jesuits were eventually abolished by a papal bull. Okay, their forceful, reckless attempts to advance the papal cause even outraged the papacy. It outraged all of Catholic Europe. And certainly it outraged Protestant England. And England just did what the rest of the world did, kicked the Jesuits out of the country. Now he says another piece of work chalked out by the Catholic Defense Society was the abolition of all penal laws affecting the Jesuits and other religious orders, that is, Roman Catholic religious orders. England did what it had to do to survive. It had to get these subversive, violent, duplicitous papists out of the country. And they're not to be blamed. All the Roman Catholic world did the same thing. And when the Jesuits were expelled from the country, there were all kind of penal laws passed to guarantee that they would never set foot on the islands again. And you know, the death sentence was issued. You come back to England, you'll meet with your end. All right. Now it's no different than the other Roman Catholic countries of the world. Now he says the tablet, this is the Roman Catholic official publication, the tablet could speak of these men, but with rapture as, quote, the greatest benefactors to religious and humanity, unquote. And it loudly accused those, quote, odious enactments, talking about these penal laws, which made these men, these Jesuits, quote, felons for the crime of rendering the truest services to God and to their neighbor, unquote. Can you imagine the Protestant government reading this? How absurd how they uphold the Jesuits despite the fact of their historical abominations in Great Britain and all of Europe, even to the point of offending the papacy and warranting their abolition in 1773. He says, quote, the services, or rather the quote-unquote services, which the Jesuits have rendered to, quote, God and their neighbor, unquote, are now well known to both, and doubtless from both they will in due time receive their reward. So here is James A. Wiley's brief reference to these Jesuits and accounting to the absurdity of defending the Jesuits by this Catholic Defense League. He says, on this point, it's not necessary we should speak. History speaks very plainly. A modest proposal, truly, that we should open our gates and give a pressing welcome and free quarters to men whom every papal court in Europe has been compelled to banish from its dominions, and whom the very Pope himself found it necessary to put down. Okay? So James A. Wiley's making the case. How absurd for the tablet or anyone else to take up defense of these Jesuits when they've been condemned the world over, even by the papacy itself. Okay, so there's no restraint in this Catholic Defense Association to reestablish the Jesuits. They are the most powerful protagonists of the papacy. And Ireland needs the Jesuits to maintain the Catholic life and to bring about Catholic, or rather papal, rule in Britain. The Jesuits are the super militia of the Pope. And wherever the Pope needs to advance his control and influence, the Jesuits are called into action. And so here is Ireland calling in the shock troopers of the Pope to come back to England. Now he says the amendment of the Emancipation Act was also to be undertaken by the Catholic Defense League. The way to Woolsack, it declared, must be open to Romanists. Now let me explain to those who don't understand. Woolsack is a reference to the the overstuffed pillow upon which the Speaker of the House of Lords occupies his seat. Okay, he sits on a big overstuffed red elaborate pillow. Okay, it's the chair of the Speaker of the House of Lords in Parliament, and Great Britain had forbid Roman Catholics to occupy those high seats of governmental authority because they were subservient to the papacy. They were not subservient to the Queen, and they were not subservient to the country. Their hearts and consciences were guided by Roman Catholic canon law and the supremacy and the divinity of the Pope, and they were not trusted to sit in such positions of authority in a free and Protestant country. Okay, common sense dictates that if you're going to remain a free and Protestant country, you can't have a papist in the most powerful positions in government, because he'll just simply turn his throne and his crown and his authority over to the Pope. Okay? You're just inviting treason if you invite a Roman Catholic to sit upon any seat of authority in the country. Now, that's a given. That's not just a mere accusation. That's historically proven. If you give a Roman Catholic a seat of authority in the country, he will use his seat of authority to usurp the government and hand it over to the papacy. Now, what absurdity would suggest that a Roman Catholic in an independent, in other words, a country that had its own government and would not submit to any pretended authority of a pope, why would that free government ever give authority to a Roman Catholic? You want to protect your independence, you certainly would not have a Roman Catholic papist in the government. All right? Now, what do we have in the United States? Papists ruling everything. Okay, some would say, everything, Tom, everything. Well, if you want to steer a horse, all you have to do is get control of his head. That's why cowboys put a bit in the horse's mouth and a bridle over his head. Because if you want the whole horse to turn right, all you have to do is steer the horse's head to the right. And Rome makes sure that she seats her papists in the head of the government. They always seek the highest offices, and they get control of the entire body. The papacy gets control of the entire body by controlling its head. Now, the amendment of the Emancipation Act was also to be undertaken by the Catholic Defense Society. The way to Woolsack, in other words, the way to controlling the government, it declared, must be open to Romanists. Okay? Papists, Roman Catholics, should have just as much right to sit in the highest offices of government as any Protestant. Otherwise, you've not tolerated Romanism. Okay? You're an oppressor. You're a tyrant. Unless you allow Roman Catholics, Papists, Romanists to occupy the head positions in the government. And he says, nor must Prince Albert, the meeting said, be prevented from becoming a papist, if so inclined, or marrying a papist in the event of the demise of the crown while the heir is under 18 years of age. That's right. There was a Protestant law in England, because of so many attempts to overthrow the government, that the list of successors to the throne of the English crown had to be Protestant in faith. Okay? Now, this is a reference to Prince Albert. This is the apparent heir to the throne. And the law required that he be a Protestant and that he marry a Protestant, or he would have to abdicate his throne, his power. Okay, he would have to secede from eligibility to the crown. So he says, nor must Prince Albert, the meeting said, that is this association, the Catholic Association, be prevented becoming a papist if so inclined, or marrying a papist in the event of the demise of the crown, while the heir is under 18 years of age. And for this purpose, the law which requires the regent to be a Protestant must be abolished. Okay? They want Catholics on the throne. And finally, the coronation oath. That is the oath that the queen takes when she takes her throne. The coronation oath, which declares that no papist shall ever sway the scepter of Britain, must the meeting held be altered. So they're demanding that the coronation oath be changed, because it guarantees that no Catholic can occupy the throne. And again, this isn't religious persecution per se. England's perfectly happy to allow the Catholics to practice their Roman Catholic faith. They're just not allowed to control the civil government, because they full well understand by demonstrated history, repeated history in England, that they will do nothing but to attempt to throw the entire civil government over into the lap of the Pope. Been proven over and over and over again. It's not a matter of question anymore. It's a foregone conclusion that if a Pope, if a Roman Catholic ever ascends the throne of England, papal rule will take place. And the country wanted to remain free and independent. They had to maintain Protestant control of the head of the government. And this is learning that has completely been forgotten in this country. That's why no one who looks at the turmoil in Washington, D.C., can even begin to comprehend what's really taking place. And of course, everything that's said in the mainstream media and even the alternative media steers everyone's minds away from any religious connotation of the events that take place in Washington, D.C. What's really going on in Washington, D.C. is a struggle for papal control and the continuance of papal mandates for our government to continue to undo the damage that was done during the Protestant Reformation, to restore the papacy's temporal and spiritual jurisdiction over not only the quote-unquote Christendom, but over all the world. The whole political system is designed to achieve papal agenda without the fact ever coming into discussion. To cover it all up with all kinds of deception. It's all playing out right before our very eyes. And no one's able to see it because they simply don't know the history of this struggle between Protestantism and Roman Catholicism. So now they've even got this cooperative third-party Islam helping to throw blinders over the eyes of the American people. Everyone's focus now is upon Islam. Well, Islam is not the aggressor. The United States, led by the papacy, the crusaders of the world, are the aggressor in the world. Okay? Now, England would know this if she were not a part of this aggression. So it's up to God's people to come to the knowledge of the truth on their own, with the Bible in one hand and a history book in the other. It's the only way in the world we're ever going to get past all the smoke and mirrors of Washington, D.C. and international politics. Our Bible plainly tells us he rules over the kings of the earth. And if we even doubt that a little bit, our research and our coming to the knowledge of the truth is going to be destroyed. We must believe what the Bible tells us. So our research must start there, that the papacy rules over the kings of the earth. And once you accept that as reality, then you can find all kinds of evidence to support it. All right. The amendment of the Emancipation Act was also to be undertaken by the Catholic Defense Society. The way to Woolsack, it declared, must be open to Romanists. Nor must Prince Albert, the meeting said, be prevented becoming a papist if so inclined, or marrying a papist in the event of the demise of the Queen, while the heir is under 18 years of age. And for this purpose, the law which requires the regent to be a Protestant must be abolished. And finally, the coronation oath, which declared that no papist shall ever sway the scepter of Britain, must, the meeting held, be altered. An attempt was also made, though it is hinted at rather than stated in the plain, of political aggression sketched in the tablet to erect convents under pretense that the poor are ill cared for and, quote, treated worse than dogs, unquote, in the workhouses. An effort was likewise to be made to introduce popish chaplains into the Army and the Navy. Okay, Roman Catholic priests in the Army and the Navy. And it says cases may occur in which it is the duty of the Catholic soldier to sheath his sword when his commander bids him draw it, and it is convenient to have a priest at hand to decide the case of conscience, so that the soldier may obey his spiritual, not his temporal leader. Now, all of that is said to let you know that as long as there are Roman Catholics in the army, that the Pope will guide the soldier's conscience through the priest, who is now, because there is Roman Catholics in the Army and the Navy, the priests must be in the Army and the Navy because they are their intercessors with heaven, see? And now we have the priest in a position to oppose the generals of the Army and the Navy. Okay? So we're even going to be warring about the goals and objectives of the military. The papacy indirectly is going to have influence over the soldiers through the priests. So what is the attempt of the papacy in this regard? To get control of the nation's military. Now, what would be the natural objective of the Pope if he had control of the militaries of the world? Well, of course, to conscientiously bind them to conquer the rest of the world for the Pope. Okay? Now, England knew what would happen. She'd had way too much experience in the past to even doubt what this meant. It was going to be a power struggle between the papacy and the crown over the use of the military. Now do you understand why there's so much turmoil in the United States military? And why there's so many commanders have been fired? Because there's a struggle over who shall command our militaries and for what purpose. History's repeating itself right before our very eyes. But no one would ever give you a clue that it's the papacy that's overthrowing the military. We'll be back right after this. back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. And if you'd like to support Inquisition Update, please support First Amendment Radio. And if you'd like to contact me, please do so by email. My email address is tom@seawaves.us. Now, it says, an effort was likewise made to introduce popish chaplains, popish priests, into the Army and the Navy. Cases may occur in which it is the duty of the Catholic soldier to sheath his sword when his commander bids him to draw it. And it is convenient to have a priest at hand to decide the case of conscience, so that the soldier may obey his spiritual and not his temporal leader. In other words, so the soldier may obey the Pope and not his military commander. Okay? It's an attempt to overthrow control of the military by the Roman Catholic Pontiff. That's the problem you get into when you fail to understand the history between Protestantism and Catholicism. Now, in fine, the vested rights of ignorance in Ireland were to be cared for. Every penny voted for the Queen's colleges, the meeting declared, must be given to the Catholic University or returned to the Exchequer. Okay? If England is going to send any money to Ireland for education, it must go to the Catholic University and not the Queen's University. Queen's University obviously being a strictly secular institution. No religion was allowed to be spoken. It was purely an institution of learning the sciences and the arts. And, of course, the Catholic University was all about Roman Catholicism, making everyone subject to the Pope. And its education was Roman Catholic canon law and Roman Catholic doctrine. It was popery that was taught in the Catholic University. And the Catholic University did what all Catholic universities do when they're in control. They keep the people ignorant and subservient to the papacy. Whereas the Queen's colleges were liberating. They engaged people in the arts and the sciences so that they could think for themselves. So, England decided that there was so much darkness and ignorance over Ireland that they were barely able to feed themselves, seeing how the entire population was completely subservient to the priests. They were subjects of the priests, and all they wanted was religious obedience, indoctrination, and control of their lives. England wanted them to be free and industrious and prosperous. So she instituted Queen's colleges to educate the people so that they could feed themselves and be contributors to the society. Whereas the priests detested this liberty. Because when light comes to a nation, all of a sudden Roman superstition becomes laughable, becomes a subject of mockery, becomes a subject of ill repute. All of a sudden, an educated Irishman would see his priest as a bloodsucker, as a phony, as one who held him in abject ignorance and compelled to serve in the Pope's delirium. It was a matter of survival for this Roman Catholic University to keep the Queen's money and the Queen's College out of Ireland. All right? He says the reader can thus look along the line of the papal aggression from its starting to its close, commencing with the Edict of the Flaminian Gate, or rather with the Emancipation Act of 1829, it ends with popery upon the throne. Such is the course decreed for it by the assembled Romanist lay and cleric in the Rotundo, and such it is the course as more minutely sketched in the tablet. The first step was to admit men who had sworn allegiance to a foreign potentate, that is the Pope, to sit in Parliament and legislate for an independent and Protestant nation. The second was to repeal the statute forbidding the importation of the Pope's bulls into Britain. That's not bulls as in bovine, that's bulls, and as in, well, I would use an Iowan derogatory comment here, but I won't. The Pope's decrees into Britain. Okay? Never before was that allowed. Okay? The second was to repeal the statute forbidding the importation of the papal bulls into Britain. And the third was the erection of the entire machinery of the papal jurisdiction in the country, territorial bishops, synods, and canon law. The fourth was to root out every vestige of Protestant instruction in Ireland by corrupting or overthrowing the national scheme and covering the country with popish schools and Jesuit schoolmasters. The fifth was to draft in large numbers Irish Roman Catholics into the poorhouses, the army, and the navy, and by compelling the appointment of popish chaplains in all these establishments to secure a virtual endowment for the church. Okay? You get Catholics involved in state institutions, then you endow Roman Catholicism. You finance Roman Catholicism. Protestant money, Protestant tax dollars, financing Roman Catholicism. You talk about a recipe for disaster, a recipe for overthrow, a recipe for surrender of your Protestant liberty and your Protestant security from papal tyranny. All you have to do is allow Romanists to take control and then to support them with tax money. That's what America has done. Almost since the founding of this country, it has endowed Roman Catholicism. He says these 5 measures have now been very fully achieved. There remaining but 2. And when these 2 shall be attained, their scheme will be completed. The first is the confiscation of the revenues of the established Church of Ireland and the appropriation of the lion's share to themselves. And the second is the throwing open of the wool sack and the throne to Romanists. That's a reference, once again, to the crown of England, the throne of England, and the Parliament, the wool sack. Once they've achieved that, that is the establishment of their church in England, and once in control of the crown, and once in control of Parliament, then everything else has been achieved. So that's all that they have left to gain their objective. The crown, the Parliament, and financial endowment of the Roman Catholic Church. He says these are sure to come unless Providence, capital P, shall interpose, as tomorrow is sure to come. And when this happens, then will be civil war. So this is how far James A. Wiley thinks this will go unless God intervenes or unless Protestants wake up, which is virtually one and the same. This is what's going to happen in the United States. This is, many argue, would say it's already happened. Okay, Protestantism has been completely defeated, has now become a vassal of the Pope. That means the government is fully represented by Roman Catholics. Protestants, ecumenical evangelibellies is the only appropriate term that can describe them now, since they've sworn allegiance to the Pope. They simply serve as a secondary role, subservient to the priests, subservient to the papists in our government. Civil laws are now taking the fashion of Roman Catholic canon law. the presidency all of a sudden looks like a dictatorship, which is just a dead ringer for papal control. But all they have to do is cover up that reality is to just make it appear that the president is a Muslim. So that's all it takes to blind the eyes of the American people of the Vatican control in Washington, D.C. Never mind the reading of the book The Global Vatican by former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, Francis Rooney, who admits the controlling function that the Vatican plays in Washington. It's ghastly what's happening. And it's even more ghastly how craftily they have deceived the American people and blinded their eyes so that they cannot see the truth. Even when the evidence is put before their eyes, they cannot believe that what is happening in Washington, D.C. and around the world is a struggle for papal supremacy. And even after reading this book, I'm sure many of the listeners of this program are still going to have a tough time comprehending what's really going on. But all we have is this perfect example in England to show us, to put down all the smoke and mirrors and to see what really happened in Great Britain in the mid-1800s to comprehend what's happened in the United States. Will there ever be civil war in the United States over papal control? I doubt it. I doubt it. I don't think America will ever come to the reality of what's really happening in this country. At least if there's a civil war in this country, it won't be Protestantism against popery. It will just be helter-skelter. The United States is so confused and so divided about the issues and so distracted away from the true issue in this country, it will just be war for the sake of war. The blacks against the whites, the rich against the poor. Every division known will be a battleground. But there's no division between Catholic and Protestant in this country. That's just how thoroughly deceived this country is. And so that's why I don't advocate a violent conflict. Look, if one American kills another American, it will just be one ignoramus killing another ignoramus. And the only one that will win is the papacy. So we're better off to live, and to live with our disagreements, at least until some light begins to shine in this country. And there's no way light can shine in this country until we pick up the King James Bible and understand it in its historical context. And I just don't see that happening with state control of the churches. And state control of the churches through the 501c3 simply means Vatican control of the churches. And so if there's any war of religion in this country, it's going to be a war of quote-unquote Christianity, which is not Christianity at all. It's popery. What a deplorable, that's the only word I can use to describe the situation in the United States and the world. Complete and total blindness, and I can tell you for nearly a decade of discussing these things on amateur radio, there isn't but a handful of people, as a proportion of the country, not a handful of people that can even begin to comprehend what's going on. And the vast majority, the overwhelming majority, don't want to hear about it, don't think the subject is worthy of discussion. As a matter of fact, they believe it's divisive and it ought not to be tolerated. And that's how I was received on amateur radio. And I tell you, First Amendment Radio is the only one that I know of that has ever opened their arms to the truth. of Inquisition Update. And I'm very grateful for having this outlet. But there's coming a day very swiftly when this kind of discussion will not even be tolerated on the internet. And so we must work while the day is dawning, because the nighttime cometh when no man is going to be able to work. Ignorance is going to be bliss in this country. And we're going to be so destitute of war, anybody's going to do about anything they can to have some bliss. And if that means ignorance, that's what it'll choose. All right, he says there is not a man living on the British soil who has not a stake in this controversy. I could say the same thing about the United States of America. There's not one living man, woman, or child in this country that does not have a vested stake in this controversy between Protestantism and Catholicism, between Christ and Antichrist. And he says and who ought not willingly to lend his aid toward its right settlement. The patriot who would not see his country made a fief of Rome, and the throne in which he takes just pride trampled on by a foreign priest, that's the papacy, the philosopher, that is the college professor, who would not see science invaded in her own halls and driven thence to make way for medieval absurdities, the literary man who would not see the press subjugated to an odious censorship, in other words, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, if you don't want that to be destroyed. It says, the friend of the poor who would not see the fruits of the earth and the labors of the industrious consumed by a swarm of idle and dissolute monks, the father who would not see the sanctity and purity of his family blighted by the questionings and promptings of a lecherous priest. This is a direct reference to the confessional box of the Roman Catholic Church. And he says, in short, the friend of progress who would not see the world's liberties overwhelmed and crushed by the great armed reaction which now embraces Western Europe, and of which the aggression in England forms a part. That's the stakes. That's the stakes. And we all have a highly vested interest in this controversy. If you don't want to see your rights trampled underfoot, if you want liberty in Christ and wish not to confess your sins to a pedophile priest, then you've got a vested interest. If you want the press of this country to tell you the truth and not go through papal censors, you want to know what truly are foreign wars, why they're fought. You have a vested interest in this fight, this controversy between Protestantism and Catholicism. If you want the right to read your Bible and to teach your Bible to your children, you have a vested interest in this controversy between Protestantism and Catholicism, and they can cloak it in any contraption they want to conceal its reality. That is the controversy between God's book and the counterfeit Christianity from Rome. Now, even if you're not a religionist, even if you're a papist, if you love the liberty that we once enjoyed in this country, you have a vested interest, a Protestant interest, in defeating popery in this country. Great Britain did it. The Catholics of Great Britain loved their liberty, their Protestant liberty, more than the tyranny of their pope. And they joined England, Protestant England, in battle against the French Armada and against the Jesuits who attempted to blow up Parliament and to overthrow the crown. My hope is that the truth of the Bible will finally be recognized by a growing majority of the Roman Catholic Church, and that they will renounce their Antichrist in Rome and seek fellowship and salvation in Christ Jesus, their Messiah, and join the fight to maintain the independence and Protestant liberties of this country, to elevate the Bible as the Word of God, and to denounce Roman Catholic canon law as a false voice. Is there hope? Is there hope at all for the United States to come to the truth? One can only pray. Now he's going to change the subject to the Synod of Thurles. This was a gathering of the bishops in synod in Ireland to overthrow the light that Protestantism was trying to shine on Ireland. It says, we could scarce imagine a better illustration of the principles we've already enunciated than is furnished in the proceedings of the National Council of Thurles, as it was styled, which was holden on September of 1850. The synod was presided over by, quote, Paul, Archbishop of Armagh, primate of all Ireland, and delegate to the Apostolic See, unquote. And its subject was to condemn the system of instruction adopted by the Queen's colleges and to take measures for the erection of a Roman Catholic university in Ireland on the model of the one founded by the Belgian bishops in Louvain. The bishops in synod assembled, condemned the government college, forbade the attendance of them by the youth of Ireland, and wound up by sending their decrees to Rome to be ratified by the Pope, deferring their publication till the return of the papal sanction. So there's a demonstration of what a synod is. If you ever read or hear of a synod being assembled in the United States of America, you will know that it is an assembly of Roman Catholic bishops to legislate temporal law and then to send it to the papacy for ratification, and that becomes the law of the land. Okay, that's your shadow government in operation in plain sight. That's exactly the way it functioned in Ireland at the time of the writing of this book, and that's exactly the way it functions in the United States today. The bishops, the Roman Catholic bishops, in synod assembled, condemned the government colleges, forbade the attendance of them of the youth of Ireland, and wound up by sending their decrees to the Pope to be ratified by the Pope, deferring their publication till the return of the papal sanction. He says, we are here shown, quote, synodical action, unquote, at work. And we appeal to our readers whether all we have affirmed as to the use of to the uses to which synodical action is sure to be turned is not here verified. Okay, so everything that he has asserted previously in this book about the bishops and about their temporal jurisdictions, that's why they fought so heavily against the ecclesiastical titles bill, because they were indeed temporal rulers, not just spiritual as they claimed. They were temporal rulers. They were to make law in synod, in assembly, send those laws to the Pope to be ratified, and then brought and announced as law in Ireland. And if this isn't a direct assault against the legitimate Protestant government of Ireland and England and Scotland, I don't know what else it is. The same goes on in the United States today. He says, we behold it inaugurating its working by proscribing the light, and championing the good old cause of ignorance. We see it making itself the vehicle for importing the Pope's jurisdiction into Great Britain and pitting that jurisdiction right up against the Queen's. The government builds colleges, the pontiff proscribes them. The government invites youth of Ireland to make use of these colleges. The Pope thunders an anathema against anyone who shall dare to cross their threshold. You see the control the papacy has among Roman Catholics? In opposition to an independent and Protestant government? The United States is just the main battleground today, just as England was in 1865. What light comes forth from true history? It confirms the truth stated in our Bible by the divine Lord of glory. We'll see you next week.